Im ein ani li mi li. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? Ukshani le'atzmi ma ani. But if I am only for myself, what am I? The words of Pirkei Avot. I'll come back to those in just a minute. First, I want to tell you a story about my father. My father was born to a poor family in Havana, Cuba. His mother died when he was just 11 years old. He and his sister spent several years in the care of aunts while their single father worked long hours as an unsuccessful businessman, entrepreneur. They always had enough to eat, but they often wore the hand-me-downs of their classmates because they couldn't afford new clothes. At the time, the public schools were terrible, but my dad was able to go to a Jewish school, Centro Israelita, a very good school, tuition-free, through need-based scholarships. El Patronato, the synagogue where he became bar mitzvah, provided funding for him to have a celebration that may not have been fancy, but it was respectable in the eyes of his peers. Then Castro rose to power. The Jewish community, wary of such leaders and the repercussions for Jews, began to flee. The Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, known as HIAS, organized an airlift so that many Jewish families could send their kids ahead to safety in America, planning to join them later as time and immigration policy allowed. My dad and his sister came to New York City that way and started out with distant family. It didn't work out for many reasons. Eventually, they ended up as young teens in the care of Jewish Family and Children's Services, which placed them in a foster home for several years before their father was able to join them. In time, my father went to City College of New York, where he paid $17 a semester to get his undergraduate education. He worked hard and got himself a good job with a big company that paid for him to get a master's at Stanford. He worked for 30 years in that company as an engineer and a manager. He got to travel all around the world, solving problems, developing technology, working on teams that invented voicemail and other innovations we take for granted. He is now retired and volunteers for his synagogue and for Habitat for Humanity, continuing to use his talents as an engineer and a native Spanish speaker to help organizations that help others. It's a story that makes me proud. And lately I've started to wonder how the various election campaigns would spin his story. In some ways, this is the American dream story. My dad is a self-made man who faced adversity, worked hard, used his talents to succeed personally and provide useful contributions to humanity through his work. On the other hand, my father might possibly be nowhere today without the intervention of a string of community organizations, his school and synagogue in Havana, publicly funded higher education, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, Jewish Family and Children's Services, and the kind souls who found him a home when he was effectively a penniless, non-English-speaking, undocumented teenage orphan refugee in New York City. He is a self-made man, but also a man standing on the shoulders of others. He helped himself and made good use of opportunity, but many of those opportunities were given to him because of community organizations which he did not create. To emphasize only one side of the story without the other is to miss important truths. When I asked him about it, he said to me, "To my credit, I worked hard and took advantage of opportunity. But really, it's been the Jewish community that made me who I am." My dad's life has a balance to it captured in that line from Pirkei Avot, the ancient collection of rabbinic ethical teachings which I spoke earlier. Im ein ani li mili, ukshe'ani le'atzmi ma ani. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? And if I'm only for myself, what am I? There's one more line to that, which is, if not now, when? But I want to focus on the first two parts of it. We need to be both for ourselves and for others. What I see in our moment as the political media machines battle it out with their hero stories and mythologies of the American character is that the American cultural narrative has lost sight of half of the equation. And what I want to offer as a Jewish American leader in this moment are the ways in which Judaism has something to offer as a balance. First, let's look at the American cultural soup we simmer in. In 21st century America, the dominant cultural current flows away from community and towards the individual. The intellectual model goes back to the political philosophers and theorists of the 18th and 19th centuries, like Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, and even Darwin, who were writing around the time of America's birth and early formation. Their ideas became deeply ingrained in our culture and self-understanding. To this day, we carry assumptions, their assumptions, about humanity and society. So what are those assumptions? This is very broad. I can't tell you how many pages are not being read right now that I cut. In broad strokes, the paradigm is a story of scarcity, competition, aggression, and violent conflict. In many theories, human nature is irredeemably selfish. Human interdependence is not the original state of nature, but a concession to the needs of the weak to defend themselves from others more savage than they. Society begins as a kind of mutual protection mafia. Man's original state, and I say man's because it was men writing of men, and I think that's significant. So man's original state was a state of solitary independence. Society and government came along and demanded that men give up some of their original unlimited freedom for the sake of security. Society and government are therefore in tension with freedom, fundamentally. Mutual dependence is a kind of unnatural weakness. The connections we form with other human beings are based solely on the benefits we gain for ourselves. These ideas still live in our culture and society today. Think about it. Our mythical hero is the self-made man. Our treasured patriotic value is personal freedom. We structure business and education and politics and our legal system around a model of competition between individuals acting primarily out of self-interest. National movements yearn for the good old days when government was small and men were freer and no one expected a handout from anyone else. Does that sound familiar? If you doubt that such ideals pervade our collective American consciousness, just take a look at what we plaster to our cars. Here's a sampling of bumper stickers I've seen on the road or found on the internet. Work harder. The people on welfare need your taxes. You are not entitled to what I earn. If you can't feed them, don't breed them. Your life is not my fault. My life is not your business. So say a fleet of cars and drivers about the individual and the community. Thus has the fabled state of nature proposed by 18th century elite political philosophers trickled down to masses of angry 21st century drivers. As a new mom and a 21st century feminist, I wonder about this fantastical state of nature, free of mutual dependence. It reminds me of the creation myths of so many patriarchal cultures, including our own, in which the first human being is born, not as a baby, but as a fully formed adult. No nurturing required, no childhood, and certainly no reflection of the lived experience of any other single human being on our planet. I'd like to remind those 18th century philosophers and those angry 21st century drivers that each of us, every single human being over the age of 5 or 6, is here today as a result of surviving many years of complete and utter dependency. Neither the Lone Ranger, nor the rugged heroes of the Wild West, nor a single successful entrepreneur started out as independent adults. Every one of them started out too weak to hold up his own head. None of us were born foraging for food in the wild, hunting and gathering and fighting over scarce resources. And where do you think those bootstraps came from? No one got to pull himself up until after his mama or some other caretaker fed him and kept him alive and safe and put those bootstraps onto his feet in the first place. The force which makes human beings survive to bring forth another generation is not just brute strength and competitive instinct. It's love. It's love. Thank you, Mama. You might think I'm just throwing around some guilt as only Jewish mothers know how. It's new for me. It's fun. But it's not just about children owing their parents, which we do. Our dependency doesn't end at the end of childhood. All of our lives, we survive only because of the connections we have to other living beings. I'm not just talking about the farmers who grow our food, the construction workers who build our homes, the laborers who make our clothes. I'm talking about oxygen, that stuff that comes and sustains us every breath we take, that comes from something besides people, that comes from plants. The state of nature is a state of interdependency. The self-made man is a fantasy that ignores fundamental aspects of the human condition. There is no rugged individual in a state of natural, unfettered freedom, unconnected to other people, owing them nothing, free from moral obligation. That is a false understanding of who we are. I wouldn't mind so much if it weren't for the consequences that happen when we as a culture or society hold up such a myth as an ideal and an aspiration. Around this time, 2 years ago, in a Tennessee town called South Fulton City, a foolish boy started a fire in a garbage can next to his grandparents' house. And then he went inside and took a shower while the fire was still burning. Before long, the fire had spread to the yard and began to approach the house. A call went out to the nearby fire department, but for 2 hours, the firefighters didn't come. They were under orders not to respond because this particular family had not paid their $75 annual fee. Eventually, when the fire threatened a nearby home that had paid the fee, they came to the scene but did not intervene. They stood by and watched as the original house burned all the way to the ground, destroying every possession and killing several pets. This is a true story. This incident generated a flurry of blog posts and debate about the morality of the firefighters and the mayor who ordered them not to respond, about whether the family deserved what they got, about the implications for libertarian views of the role of government. What all this flurry did not do was to change the policy or the underlying dynamic that made such a thing possible. In December of 2011, a little over a year later, the same thing happened again to another home in that same area. I look at these incidents and I wonder, how could we have come to this? Even Darwin would admit this lack of collective concern is not evolutionarily adaptive. How could we have created a society in which people can simply opt out of basic government structures, in which people train to save lives and work entirely for the welfare of others, follow an order, and stand idly by in order to teach someone a lesson over $75, in which others who live nearby watch the tragedy unfold and then continue to gamble that they're better off saving that $75 than supporting the community fire protection system? There's a problem here. But it's not just, as the bloggers suggest, freeloading jerks or heartless, angry mayors. It's not just blind obedience to bad orders. It's something beyond the individuals involved, and pointing fingers at each of the players in that story misses the whole point. The problem is how communities function, how we think about community itself. We have lost our balance. If I am only for myself, what am I? Kshani le'atzmi ma ani. Against this backdrop, Judaism seems quite countercultural. Our mythology of human origins begins with relationship and morality. Where American democracy is based on rights, Judaism is based on duty and responsibility. And while Judaism acknowledges self-interests as one of our inner drives, it teaches us to look for a deeper, more meaningful source of motivation. So let's look at some of those Jewish teachings. I want to start at the beginning, the very beginning, creation, as told by Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, according to the teachings of Kabbalist Isaac Luria. He says, Hashem Yitbarach Machmat Rachmanuto bara et haolam. It was because of his Rahmanis, his love, that God created the world, to reveal his love. For if not for the creation of the world, to whom would he reveal his love? Now, when God wanted to create the world, there was no room to create it because everything was in a state of Ein Sof, endlessness. So in other words, this before creation time, God was completely saturating everything. No space for anything but God. Therefore, he contracted the light to the sides, and by means of this contraction, a void space was created. And within this void space, all of the days and the qualities came into being. And these are what we find in the Genesis account of the creation of the universe. So says Rabbi Nachman. So, God wanted a love relationship. You might even say God was lonely. The first step was to contract and make space for the other to exist, because love is only possible between two beings. With only one, love ceases to be possible. And love, says Rabbi Nachman, is the whole reason that the universe came to be. Love, relationship, making space for the other. These are the driving forces of creation and the foundation of humanity, according to this telling of the story of creation in Judaism. As we know, it didn't take long for other less godly drives to come into being. By chapter 4 of Genesis, jealousy consumes Cain and he murders his brother Abel. Yet even as the Torah locates jealousy and hatred in these early human beings, it simultaneously reinforces the idea that we are responsible for one another. Am I my brother's keeper? Asks the murderer sarcastically. The answer, though it is never stated explicitly, is yes. Yes, Cain, you are and always were your brother's keeper. And your sin began when you forgot it. Fast forward to the legislative material of the Torah, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy. Here is where we receive the commandments, love thy neighbor as thyself, do not oppress the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Leave the corners of the field for the orphan and the widow. These are just a tiny sampling, because the river in Judaism that teaches we have obligation to care for others is deep, very deep. Fast forward again to the Middle Ages, during which the Jewish communities of Europe organized elaborate social safety nets, imposing and collecting taxes, distributing resources to lift the most vulnerable out of hunger and poverty, educate children, provide loans, and even support dignified weddings and funerals for the poor. Caring for the vulnerable members of society has never been left in the Jewish system to the charitable whims of the private citizen. It is legislated with robust structures that make no apology, asking more of those who can give it. Jewishly speaking, being part of society means feeding the hungry, educating the children, maintaining common goods for the whole community, and taking responsibility for one another in a way that many Americans seem now to disdain. Society is not fundamentally a protective mafia system. It is a vehicle for collective holiness. That's why my dad got a good education and a respectable bar mitzvah in Havana, though he was dirt poor. That's why there's something called Jewish Family and Children Services and Child Protective Services. And that's why we pay taxes. We don't do it so the children can grow up to be job creators. We do it because that's what it means to be human. Reconstructionist thinker Ronald Reagan writes, "If modernity has taught us to say I, Judaism still asks us to say we." One of the most literal times that Judaism asks us to say we is during the confessional prayers of Yom Kippur. Many have asked me, how can we honestly say, Ashamnu, Bagadnu, Gazalnu, we have sinned, we have been untruthful, we have stolen? I have not stolen. Why should I say in my prayers, we have stolen? I have not stolen. What do I mean when I say it? Praying in the collective voice, confessing together, is a kind of training. A reminder that responsibility extends beyond one's individual sins and good deeds. We humans, we Jews, we Americans, do things collectively. Our social systems, our ecology, our biology bind us to one another in ways we are only beginning to understand. My behavior impacts all living things, my choices. And though the whole world doesn't rest on my shoulders alone, it does rest on the shoulders of us all together. No, I didn't commit murder, thank God. But I live in a society with one of the highest homicide rates of the developed world, and I have a responsibility to think about that. I myself did not enslave another person, but my choices as a consumer may have supported a system of slave labor across the globe, and I have a responsibility to think about that too. And after the thinking, I may need to act. When Judaism asks us to say we, it asks us to think about the social structures that we create together. It asks us to concern ourselves with the well-being of those beyond the boundaries of self and family. And it promises in turn that when we break through the barriers of selfishness, great gifts await us. We is inclusive. It means you and I together. We claims hold of the collective. It claims belonging and plurality, similarity and solidarity. We say we when we are together. The we can give us courage, comfort, inspiration, power. We can even say we when we're alone. Last year, I was alone during Ne'ilah, the final service of Yom Kippur. I don't know if you were here, but I wasn't here with you. I had been sick that day and mothering an infant, sleeping, sniffling, coughing, nursing, breathing. And then Raj and Adam went on a walk and left me by myself. And I saw the sun setting, and I realized it was Ne'ilah. The gates were still open, but they were about to close, and there I was, sick and alone, without my community at the end of the holiest day of the year. So I got out my machzor, my High Holy Day prayer book, and I wrapped my talit around me, and I sat on my living room floor, and I davened, Ashamnu, Bagadnu, Dibarnu Dofi. We have acted wrongly. We have been untrue. We have spoken slander. Ay, 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 ay. Suddenly I was alone, but I was with everyone. Everyone at the Unitarian Church on Franklin. Everyone in synagogues all along the West Coast singing out their hearts, searching for forgiveness as the sun set. Everyone through the ages calling with these words, these melodies. I was alone, but I was not alone. Sometimes you can only learn from experience and immersion. So if you want to know what it means to belong to a genuine living community, the best way is to see one in action. As a rabbi of Or Shalom, I see our community in ways that may be invisible to many of us here. I see our members bringing soup to one another when they're sick and organizing regular meal support for families in times of crisis. I see droves of families signing up to work shifts at the food bank. As one of the stewards of an Or Shalom fund that helps families to afford the costs of B'nai Mitzvah, I have seen one family in particular replenish that fund through the years long after their daughters came of age. I've seen our teens working with our school to give individualized attention to new students who need to catch up on Hebrew. I've seen volunteers work behind the scenes at holidays, fundraisers, and other events to set up, clean up, lock up, and worry about the logistics so that the rest of us can have a seamless experience. I've seen a handful of member households come together to fund our purchase of these new High Holy Day prayer books that we're using this year for the first time. And I've seen a different handful of members work for hours to renovate the chapel downstairs where we hold services and Torah study. I've seen dedicated donors year after year giving very generous gifts to the community without recognition, who make it possible for us to keep our doors open and pay our hardworking staff. And though at times I worry that some of our most active volunteers and donors may carry too much, I seldom hear complaints. Most of the time what I see is the way in which these folks who give find their lives enriched by their giving. We need each other to reveal the best in ourselves, just like even God needed creation to manifest love. Community is the vehicle through which we can manifest our best. As Mordechai Kaplan, founding thinker of Reconstructionist Judaism, writes, life becomes infinitely more meaningful and worthwhile when we become aware of a common life that transcends our individual selves. I think again about my dad. What makes his life meaningful these days, in addition to delighting in his grandson, is the volunteer work that he does, giving back. Does he do so because he feels some debt to the community? Perhaps. But even if he acts out of a sense of duty, he would still say that he receives much more than he gives. Purpose, challenge, fulfillment, connection. Knowing that he is part of a great cycle of giving and receiving, an exchange that is only possible between two or more beings, impossible if we live for ourselves alone. So what about us here? Just showing up today, we are all part of something beyond ourselves. Whatever brought you here, whatever religious upbringing you may have, however marginal or central Or Shalom may be at the moment in your social network, you here now are part of something that is magnificent. You are part of a we. People gathering for the sake of being better, reaching for the best in themselves, trying, however clumsily, to forgive and to admit their imperfections. It is a task so monumental that it spans generations and continents, so frightening that we cannot do it alone. We need each other in order to succeed. And that need is not our weakness, but our strength. Over the ages, our ancestors have bequeathed to us a treasury of tools, words, melodies, rituals, a calendar of sacred time, forms that teach us how we can turn away from selfishness and greed, violence and apathy, how we can return to love and compassion, how we can heal what is broken within and between us, and build a better society. Being together right now, all of us are part of this grand project. We're here because no matter how cynical, how wounded, how corrupted with the slime of sin and shame, some part within maintains a flame of hope that transformation is possible. And some intuition or tradition or sense of duty even urges us to seek it in the company of others. We are here not to judge, but to forgive, to encourage one another to see the goodness inside and to support its flowering. We need each other to reveal the best in ourselves. May our gathering strengthen us in the work we must do, in the changes we must make. May we find inspiration and support through being part of something bigger than ourselves. May we experience the fulfillment of giving and caring and connecting to our fellow human beings. And may this be the year in which our families, communities, our nation, and our world come back into balance, valuing compassion alongside independence, teaching our children to care and connect, and living in a way that manifests the love between us, which is why we are here in the first place.